Hey everybody, we're Shyam and Chris, and this is Fan Team Radio. And we're back after a somewhat eventful Monaco weekend 2024. Chris, what's up?
Yeah, we got to tip our hat, right? Charles Leclerc finally has upgraded himself from the Prince of Monaco to the King of Monaco. Finally won his home race. The curse has been broken. I'm sure he had as much anxiety that whole race, especially the last half of the race, as we did from just because the guy's been on pole twice before, I believe. Never finished on the podium, even from pole. And, the guy's been trying to win this race his whole life. He's only born and raised from Monaco. Not the son of a wealthy family. His mom's a hairdresser and stuff like that. So it's just kind of that dream, taking a nobody and becoming the pinnacle of F1. So hats off to Charles. So glad to see him win. But besides lap one, that's kind of where I think F1 needs to be super lucky that Charles won this race, because if it had been the Max Verstappen show after that lap one, people would be like, "What the hell is that?" At least they have a story to go off with Charles. But what are your thoughts on Charles winning?
So I watched the first two laps and I was like, holy shit, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And there was an intermission for the red flag, and I fell asleep.
Yeah.
I woke up and Charles won. So to me, the first watch was incredibly exciting.
Yeah,
Because it's almost like I ate all of the goodness of like a sandwich, and then later on I realized that the rest of the sandwich sucked. And it's so boring. Hats off to Charles. I thought that he was on suicide watch for us for a long time after a string of it's like the most unlucky driver in the world. I feel like a couple of DNFs, DNS, in Monaco. It just wasn't. It was just a curse of a different level. It was like almost like a Madden curse that took place on him.
That moment where his hydraulics went out in the formation lap last year, and he just crashed into the wall in the formation lap, and he's like, "Why am I so unlucky?" It was just like that guy was literally going, like you said, on suicide watch. So, but he's had the best day of his life. I don't know if you've seen those pictures of him jumping in the pool or jumping in the water with Fred, which is amazing.
Yeah,
but he looks like he had a good time.
Yeah, no, it couldn't have happened to a better guy. It seems like, he's a company man, and I've bashed him for it, on this show.
Sure.
And I've also called into question if he's a Grand Prix winner because of his bad luck and how it just persisted through his career. And it was great to see. You couldn't write it any better than what it was.
100%.
Unfortunately, the way that it panned out was incredibly boring. I think we'll touch on this in a bit, Chris, about what are the implications of these races in Monaco going forward, and do we need to rely on pit stops or tire strategies, forced tire strategies, or does Pirelli need to make like a new set of tires for this race specifically? Because you shouldn't be able to go all 77 laps, 77 right, or 78, all 78 laps with the single tire. I think that's ridiculous, especially when there's no ability to overtake. Your starting grid should not be the same starting grid as qualifying. Like that's just the first time that's ever happened. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think Charles had a great race. He maintained the starting position throughout the entire race, which is incredibly hard to do, even when it is a slow pace. I think George had a lot to do with holding off a lot of the back of the pack, so he wasn't having to deal with some of the nastiness that happened, in the first lap, and then later on, he didn't need to worry about being overtaken because he was able to defend fairly well. I think the team strategy has starkly been different after he got his new race engineer. They seem to be hitting it off in a way that's similar to how GP and Max are, wherein like Charles was like, "Hey man, can I announce essentially how my pace over the radio?" And they're like, "Don't do that.
Yeah,
We
we're
don't
not
need
interested
that."
in
Be like,
that.
don't do that." And then he's like, "That's
You're a
rude."
junkie?
So
Yeah.
that was fun. I think um, again, Chris, this goes back to the top down culture that I've always talked about in F1 that I've observed as a fan during my time watching it, and how Freddie Vasseur kind of brings this like air of like levity to the situation where the culture has always been really gung ho and Scuderia centric. I think Fred as an outsider came in, improved the performance of the car, has been able to optimize his drivers' performances as well, and it creates like you're able to have more fun when the team is in good standings. I think you're seeing that with McLaren as well and with Zach. So when all's going smoothly, you can have a culture of fun, and you kind of just saw essentially a perfect storm for Ferrari this week, with Charles winning, with Carlos getting P3 despite that lap one incident that he had with Oscar. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But yeah, I think this week is probably the best day of Charles's life.
Yeah, absolutely. He said he was tearing up the last two laps, and I was kind of worried about that too, getting making a little mistake from being emotional. But yeah, I'm
That would
sure,
have been the worst case scenario. To
bro.
lead the entire thing and then get teary eyed and fuck it up. That'd be like worse than Checo messing up on the first lap in Mexico 2023.
Dude,
So that would have been awful. I'm glad that that wasn't the case, but everyone was tearing up, man. The volunteers that were that were at the race, and just the
yeah,
fans, like everyone was cheering up. I fell asleep again after that, but when I woke up, I reposted some of his shit.
yeah, man. But yeah, if he had crashed or made a mistake at the last there, I'd probably still be on the couch crying about it. But you know, unfortunately, like you said, this is an amazing story. Charles winning, it's great. But there wasn't much else to it after that first lap. So let's talk about those incidents. So first, we have a little bump between Sainz and Piastri, which gives Carlos a puncture, and a little bit of damage to Oscar, starting the chain reaction of things. Um, and then ultimately, we have the second incident right after that. Uh, but Carlos had gone off the track, and the guy, I guess he should have been in last place at that point, but he got very lucky that the other incident happened before the lap finished, and so they reset that. So, I'm curious about your thoughts on that incident between Oscar and Sainz, and do you think Carlos should have gotten his position back?
So Carlos came off the line much quicker than Piastri did, and going into the first two, I guess, chicanes before the big turn, it seemed like Carlos's car was ahead. But to maintain that position, they got very close, as that's how Monaco is, uh, and he clipped it. It was a really seemed like a minor clip, but when you're going that fast and you're turning that hard, I can see that becoming a pretty big issue. And Carlos got saved by the red flag. Right, he essentially should have started in the back, but given when the incident happened that caused the red flag, he was able to reset and get back into third place. And as we just talked about, the race ended the same way that qualifying ended. That was if I was Oscar, if I was a temperamental Oscar, I'd probably have something to say. But Oscar's very cool headed, and he was able to see the bigger picture throughout the race, and you can kind of hear it in his feedback. I think that he's on his way to winning his race soon enough.
Sure.
But I think that this was an incident where it was more of a racing incident than anything else during this race. I think it was just Carlos getting off the line really quickly, Oscar not wanting to concede because his car was just on par with Carlos's, but then yeah, he got clipped. Carlos went off road, and he got saved. That's just kind of how it happened, and I'm not mad about it. I think that's more of a racing incident than anything else, especially the next incident. So yeah, if you want to tee that up, Chris, I'm happy to go into that one with you.
I just want to touch one more quick on the signs incident, and I just want to, when the incident happened, even the announcers were unsure of what's going to happen. They basically said that Carlos is going to start from the back of the grid, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, so there's no point in just bringing it up over and over. But I just want it to be definitive. I want the announcers to be like, well, they haven't finished the lap yet, so we get reinstated at the starting positions. Or, 50% of the lap has been finished, so we go by the last mini sector. Whatever it is, I want it to be clear because to everybody, Carlos got really lucky to get his P3 back on the second restart. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Like the rules should be clear. So I I'm not mad about it either. I mean, there was a lot of chaos. They hadn't finished the lap, and kind of go back to the last known position before the chaos. But it's not definitive, right? We don't know that every time. The stewards could have said nope. They finished sector one because the red flag didn't come out until I think they were already on the very last sector, getting close to the start finish straight. So, at what point do you say, reset and go back to the original order or whatnot? I don't know, but yeah, they just need to figure that out. Um,
It's like how do video game developers come to the consensus of when they're going to reset a game, and you can't, you have to go back and redo the entire hard ass mission all over again, or are they going to give you a little bit of a break and let you reset in the middle of the mission, maybe where like you've overcome one really hard part and there's like maybe another hard part that you have to, like what that needs to be defined. Yeah, like it's very arbitrary. We talked about it before, right? The arbitrary nature of some of the how the rules and the punitive measures are kind of handed out to drivers. In this instant, I think it was so close to the start of the race, and I think Carlos did have position on Oscar that I'm not, it's not a huge deal for me. Also because, uh, you know, Carlos's car, I guess in a way you have to think about potential red flags and yellow flags as a part of your own strategy, right? That's just always been kind of inherent in a lot of the strategy making leading into a race. Is there's a potential for this track to have more risk of yellow and red flags historically, so we're going to factor that into our strategy making preemptively. And so if Ferrari was like, if all these teams are trying to capitalize on potential red, yellow flags, then maybe this is a version of Carlos and Ferrari capitalizing on a red flag, right? That they're able to take the risk, be a little bit more aggressive, and then something happens like this, and they're able to get their position back. I don't know. This one, I think at the end of the day, you need more definitive kind of rulemaking around this type of incident where what's the reset point, and is it going to be a full lap back, or do you divvy it up into sectors, and wherever the snapshot of those drivers positions within that sector, it just resets back to that. um, I feel like that's a little more advanced than what FIA is trying to do with this race, or with
yeah,
with anything in F1. I think they're like, if it's not going to bring money in, then why are we going to do it anyways, So that's kind of my standing there. Is like they're probably not going to change anything until there's some sort of money being exchanged and involved. Like maybe ratings are dropping because like the fans are just turned off from things like this happening. Because imagine if that happened to Charles. Imagine if like Charles got clipped and they were like, well, we're just going to reset it by the the standings as they currently are when you got clipped. Like imagine like the mutiny F1 would have on their hands,
sure,
like
yeah,
with the Monegasque people. I yeah, and you could also think about it in certain other ways, like where they made a lot of decisions that they did to ensure Charles was going to win, right? Like maybe having Carlos up in the front, but not so close to Charles, ensured that Carlos can act as a barrier for Charles to win. Things like that. Can I prove them? No, but the FIA sucks at making rules kind of standardized across races, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, it's easy, right? Like it could be, whenever the flag is called, that's the order, or it could be, whenever the flag is called, it's at the order of whatever sector everyone has completed. So, like, if all cars have completed sector two by the time the flag is called, that's the order, or whatever it is. I don't know, but just define it and let's move on from there. But you know, enough on that incident. We had a much bigger shunt that caused that red flag, and Checo Perez did a good demonstration of the size of the cars that we need in Monaco going forward to have good races. About half of, I think about half
Essentially, the
of it.
cockpit. Yeah, essentially the
Yeah,
cockpit.
they call it a survival cell for a reason. And by the way, it's just amazing that they can have shunts like that. I don't know if you saw the video camera feed where the car hit the wall from the photographer's point of view,
Yeah.
but I guess one of the photographers was injured and had to go to the hospital. Obviously, he was okay, uh, and great for that. But that's a huge shunt. There was a lot of debris and took both Haas's out. And there's been a lot of controversy whether it was Sergio's fault, K Mag's fault. Jeremy Clarkson has come out and said that he doesn't think it was Kevin Magnus's fault. And I was watching Sam Collins on F1 TV, and he basically blamed K Mag a little bit, but then also said like there was like two car widths on the side of Checo. He could have given him more space. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Is it a racing incident? Is there more blame on one side or the other? I don't know.
Um, I think ultimately it's a racing incident, but you can also stack a couple of a penalty against Magnussen. Here's why I say that. So Checo maintained the middle of the track, which is his right. He's able to do that as a defensive maneuver. K Mag says that his tire was right up to the right side of Checo, and Checo says like this is happening so fast
Yeah,
that you now have to essentially say Checo, by just looking at his mirror, has to register and move within a microsecond. Like it's just some things are just like even as good of a driver as you are, like certain things are just like, is that the expectation of that driver? Is like if your car is ahead, you need to be able to look in your rearview mirror and act in like a microsecond to something that's happening behind you, like. Or do you look at K Mag and his history of not conceding a position, going into a straight uphill, and essentially trying to nudge himself into like I think Hulkenberg said it the best, like immediately too. He's like that was unnecessary, completely
yep,
unnecessary. Like if Magnussen, you have 78 laps, dude. Like he the problem is he actually believes that he was in the right. And there are other like Jeremy Clarkson, I guess, and people that are pundits that are going to say the same thing, right? That like Magnussen had all the right to do that, but Perez had the right to stay in the center and defend his position. Hulkenberg was able to make past it. Why didn't Magnussen just back out? The onus is on that driver. If you get rear-ended, Chris, like who's the onus on? You or the person that just hit you? Like you
the
have no
rear.
control of what that person behind you is doing. Sure, if you recall back to that other incident we were just talking about with Sainz and Piastri, the reason why I'm not giving Piastri like a lot of shit is because even though Carlos had a quicker get off the line, Piastri's car was very on par with him. I think like his front wheels were right just behind the front wheels of Carlos. In that instance, the expectation is Carlos understands there's a car next to him throughout the entire thing, and he has to make room for that. Piastri even made room for Carlos, going into that first turn. The same concept needs to apply here as well. Like Magnussen's car, sure, was it technically like the his front wheel up against Checo's? Sure, very momentarily, and that was momentarily enough for him to clip Perez, then Perez to clip Hulkenberg and completely spin out. So is it a racing incident? Sure, you could label it as a racing incident. I can understand why some people would think that way. But ultimately, there is someone to blame here, and I think it's K Mag. I think his there's precedence for the way that he drives. Um, so I think it's on him. I also think it was really weird that due to such a slight touch, there was so much damage.
Yeah.
Like that. It didn't seem like it was like a high impact. I thought the crash with Pierre and Esteban, which we'll talking about in a bit, I thought that was gonna have a lot. That should have had a lot more of a crash impact, I guess, right? But I guess this is really hard to tell with the trajectory and the forces that are applied to these cars where they're going to have the most uh, damage. Poor fucking Hulkenberg, man. Like that, I feel most mad about Kevin Magnussen's actions because of what it did to Hulk's race. Um, and and why don't I feel as bad for Perez? He shouldn't have been there in the first place. He should have qualified way better. Like you're in a Red Bull. Like what's going on there? So I'm not too terribly mad about what happened to Checo because, like, dude, like, should you have been in their first place? It is. I am glad everyone's safe because it was a pretty big crash. I'm very glad everyone's safe and there's nothing that happened to like the cameraman or to the drivers. But like K Mag has a history of doing this. He should have gotten penalty points on this. He should not be racing like the next two races or so, whatever the penalty is uh, for getting two more. Well, what is the penalty, Chris? Do you remember? Is it just
So
one race?
So it's supposed to be a race ban. However,
Yeah.
they didn't even investigate the incident or give him any points. And I was talking to Sam about this, and he said he was listening to the P1 guys, and their theory is that FIA has never dished out a race ban in the history of the sport, and they just won't. Like they won't set that precedent. And so that's the theory why they didn't even investigate or give him a penalty, because that would have to instigate a race ban. And so they chalk it up to a racing incident so they don't have to give him a ban. Like obviously, if it's something super obvious and egregious, they probably couldn't hand wave anymore. But because it was so ambiguous, because lap one chaos, yada yada, they chalk it up to a racing incident. Although, we'll talk about this in a second, but they did give penalty to Esteban. So it's kind of interesting that they would kind of hand wave that away and not give him a race ban. But it's one of those things that they've never done it, and they probably don't want to. They probably don't want to do it. So,
It
but
makes no
yeah,
sense to me.
it,
It just rewards bad behavior.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, he deserves a race ban. He's had too many incidents, and he's even admitted that he's drove a little dirty in a couple of spots in the last couple of races. Tries to do within the rules, but does things that you probably shouldn't be doing. But yeah, like you said, Checo shouldn't have been there. And honestly, K Mag has a history of bumping into people, damaging his car, damaging his wing, and Checo, in my opinion, has a history of being awful in traffic. Like I just don't think, he's in a Red Bull. He's used to being in a rocket ship, and he's had multiple shunts and incidents where he just kind of expects people to get out of his way because he's in that Red Bull, and they just don't. And that is what it is. So I'm going to put probably like 80% on K Mag and 20% on Checo, but it is what it is. Racing incident. It was a huge shunt. Like you said, it makes no sense. So I've seen some crazy crashes where you remember that crash between Verstappen and Hamilton in
Where he went over his head.
Jeddah or whatnot.
Where he
And
went over his head with his tire. That one.
no, no, no. The one like two races before Abu Dhabi or a race before Abu Dhabi, I can't remember. They were at Jeddah or whatnot, and remember when he had to let Lewis by him, and then he kind of brake checked him so that he could let Lewis by because he was trying to slow down. Verstappen was trying to slow down because he had to let Lewis past him, but he was trying to do it in such a way where he could again reattack him almost immediately.
Mhm.
Lewis didn't know what he was doing, and then they smashed into each other, and all this graphite carbon fiber came off of Lewis's car, and then he ended up winning that race. Like these crashes make no sense. Sometimes they're little touches and they have crazy ass damage, and sometimes they do big shunts and they're able to continue on. So F1 cars are crazy, and I don't know, but yeah, that was a huge shunt. The other part that we could talk about this is should these crashes go towards the cost cap, because I think Helmut Marko was quoted or saying something like $3 to $4 million in potential damages. Do you think that should go against Red Bull's budget? They're going to have to reduce their catering plans for the rest of the year now. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, I think the cost cap is something that they're not going to move away from now that it's kind of instilled and baked in. Um,
I mean, I just don't think that if K Mag breaks Checo's car, that Red Bull should have to pay for that. Like, I don't know.
See, that's where it gets tricky because we've talked about how the FIA should maybe have like a pool of funds to give
Yeah.
towards like teams in situations like this that let the team use their cost cap towards making a better race car, and some punitive like damages can be absolved by the FIA, but I don't think there's a world where that's just going to happen.
Yeah,
And go ahead.
we've talked about it before. Cheyenne had an amazing idea, and I think this is what they should do. Taking upon your idea that you came up with a few episodes ago, it needs to be self-insured F1 damage budget, and like you said, maybe some of the top teams put in a higher amount, some of the bottom teams, and then you get a pool of damage costs the teams can pull from. That's a great idea. I think that they should implement that because I don't think Red Bull should lose wind tunnel time or development time or time developing the car because now they don't have budget to work on the 2026 car or 2025 car or whatever
Same for
because they
Haas
have.
because it's going to be even like Haas has two cars they have to fix now. You
Yeah,
know,
I
like
mean, it's not Hulkenberg's fault, although he's not going to be a Haas next year. But either
yeah,
way,
so that's a great example, right, Chris? Like in this example, that pool of funds would just cover Hulk's car, and then the team would have to cover the damages for K Mag's car. But then they would have to admit in that instance that K Mag was at fault. So this is where accountability is key, and the FIA as a governing body do not want to be held accountable for arbitrary things. They just want to be able to shift things underneath the rug because the next race is going to come and people are going to forget. Like they built a business model on this, right? It's kind of like how big tech is, big banking like when you're too big to fail, you can afford to just shift things underneath the rug, right? Until someone calls it out over and over again. Maybe this is just a small piece of more examples that's going to happen. That's going to need to coalesce in order to shift the FIA to be like, hey, like, is the team's dollar being used as best as possible towards improving this sport and this product that we're giving to our fans? The only way they're going to do that is if fans start pulling back. Like I think that's the only way to change FIA's mind about anything that relates to rule changes and stuff like that is either the team bosses are all going to get together and cause a ruckus, or they lose viewership, and they're putting in more money than they're bringing in, and that's when, because the thing is, Chris, this rule change won't wouldn't impact finances in terms of coming in and out it would actually give the FIA a little bit more power in terms of how to bring parity the into the grid. That's what I'm saying. Like there are certain ways that you could factor, like kind of think about this as a win-win-win situation. But until they're just like a shitty governing body. I'm sorry to say it. Like there's really no, like, I'm trying to say it in the nicest way possible, but they're just a shitty governing body. And they
Agreed.
all have different factions that have a lot of self interests, and I think that's just what happens when a sport is international, right? Soccer has a very similar issue. So yeah, I think the cost cap, they're going to keep it as is. I don't think they want to do anything too complex with it because it's too complex. Um, but I think in this situation, if there was a pool of funds, then I'll put it another way. I don't think Haas is going to be able to keep climbing in the ranks in a way that they were kind of predicted to earlier this year, uh, because this cost cap, or this cost that's going to be kind of hurdles against them after this race, is going to bring down their ability to add on, upgrades to both cars throughout the course of the season. To which effect, I will say, if they have any fucking upgrades coming up, they should only give it to Hulkenberg and not give it to K Mac.
I agree. I think another potential solution, real quick, we don't have to dwell on it, is give every team a line item for damage budget at the beginning of the year, and like every
Yeah,
team has to set aside X million, and that's aside. And if you go above and beyond that, then it comes out of your cost cap. But otherwise, it's already accounted for in that predetermined budget. But you know, we'll see what they do going forward. I just don't like the fact that someone like Science is determining where they're going to race next year, and I don't know if Haas was even an option, but it would change your mind a little bit. Be like, holy shit, they have less money now, like just because of an incident. Decisions shouldn't like that should be made,
they'll
but
definitely stay a beggars can't be chooser company type of team.
I agree. But we had another incident on track between a team that's already struggling a little bit, and Esteban took the this Art and Senna celebrations a little too seriously about going for a gap that exists, and decided to try to overtake his teammate into one of the corners and cause another incident between these Alpine drivers that apparently don't like each other. So actually, I don't know if you saw it, but there was two. They hit each other twice. So leading up to that turn, they bumped each other and their tires rubbed a little bit, and then Esteban dived into Pierre and sending his car basically flying. So uh, yeah, these guys just probably shouldn't be on the same team together moving forward. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on Esteban and what's going to happen between these two guys and what's going to happen with Alpine as a cause of it.
Yeah, um, so totally Esteban's fault. This one is
Yep,
not even like a if and or but, like the first two were. It's totally Esteban's fault. Again, very similar to Kevin Magnussen. He has a history of doing shit like this, right? The volatility between him and Pierre, like that's just been unfurling for the longest time, right? Pierre was pissed off, and rightfully so. This dude Esteban, he is. I was texting with you and Sam about this earlier, but it's worth repeating. He is quickly becoming my least favorite driver. I think I've talked ad nauseum on this show about how the sense of entitlement is what really gets to me about, like, and all these guys that have some sort of it, but
of
like
course,
Alonso has a huge sense of entitlement, but dude delivers. I mean, not recently, but by and large, he delivers. Um, Lewis, like asking for a position at Ferrari is totally justified. He's a class driver. There are certain drivers that can command their spot somewhere. It's, they can decide their fate within the sport. Esteban's not one of them, but
100%.
he carries himself in a way, especially on the racetrack, like even in conversations, Chris, like we talked about, like how whenever a reporter asks him about anything about another racer, this dude will interject himself into that story. He'd be like, yeah, like Max had a great race, but we used to drive together back in karting, and we, I would always come first, like shit like that. It's just really gross. Um, and I think he was like, yeah, I'm a Mercedes junior driver. Like I'm gonna, he just has such this inflated sense of self that it's and when it shows like if he just stayed off track with that shit, I don't care. Like I don't have to watch his like things, but when it bleeds into on track actions, like trying to overtake your fucking like teammate when there's really no reason to do that. You have 78 laps, like that. I think that the hate against him is kind of justified. I think even though Bruno Famin, I don't really think of him much as a principal. I think if he were to ban Esteban for the next two races or whatever the tough decision that he alluded to in his post race interview, like I think it's justified. I think like Esteban, just like K Mag, if you don't, you know, slap them on the wrist or give them something to chew on whenever they do something wrong, they're going to just keep doing it. And I wouldn't blame them, right? At a certain point, it does have to be someone else's decision that at the ownership level or at the management level to say like, hey, like we got to put you in the stall for a little while. Give Jack Doohan a drive, dude. Like I'd love to see how Jack, like just given the fact that Ollie Behrman, like dude, the F2 race between Kimi Antonelli and Ollie Behrman, that was so entertaining to watch. Like
I was watching that. It was
yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, like Liam Lawson, like these young guys, like give Jack Doohan a shot, like let him show what he's got. I mean, I don't know. I think Esteban Ocon is probably not gonna get a drive next season with Alpine. If it turns out that K Mag ends up not getting a seat at Haas, they might take on Ocon. Is it the lesser of two evils? I don't know, but at least Ocon has won a race before. Um, I don't know. I just think like both of those drivers do not bring uh, a healthy aura with them to any team that they go to. And I think when it shows when push comes to shove, they will shove and they'll do it at the worst times. So that's my thoughts on Ocon. Totally his fault. Felt bad for Pierre on this one. He was able to recover, luckily, with that red flag and kind of have a same luck potential that Carlos Sainz had. So yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you anything that stood out to you about the Bruno Famin's comments afterwards? Do you think he'll follow through with it?
Yeah, I mean, this things get taken out of context, headlines and everything like that. We're talking about James Vowles replacing Sargent already at Imola. That did happen. There's all these things flying around. Things get said. That being said, I wouldn't put it past um, if something were to happen to Esteban. I know this is like kind of a new development, but those guys have been hotheads at each other for a long time now, and apparently they haven't been able to find a way to work together. So, if Esteban is the lesser of the two drivers and he's the one who's causing more incidents and probably behind the scenes the hotter head, then you got to get rid of him. You have to get rid of him, and I wouldn't mind seeing some of these reserve drivers and the Jack Doohans of the world or the Liams and stuff like that taking these seats. I'd rather start seeing the shakeup start happening now. And we've talked a lot about what next year's drivers lineup looks like, and Esteban is one of those drivers that I think we'd be fine going without. So we'll see what happens. But Alpine's in a lot of trouble, and they need to figure some stuff out. And getting two drivers that can actually work together and be teammates and try to actually make things happen, get some points, is probably a really good start. So we'll see what happens.
You don't need them to
Most of
love each other, right? Like Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton didn't love each other. They forged a great kind of. I think Lewis still sends Jenson Button like his daughter's gifts for like the holidays and stuff. So they forged a great like friendship after the fact. Like Vettel did the same thing with Lewis, but when they were on the grid together, they hated each other, like it was just like, but they respected each other's drives. They did take each other. I think they took each other out before. And this was before I became a fan of the sport. But there is a way to have two drivers that might butt heads and get them to be on the same page. It requires a really good leader, mentor. I don't think Bruno Famine is the guy for that, but it's not like he asked for this. He kind of probably did. I don't think like he asked for this, but maybe this is a place where Otmar would have been useful, right? Otmar seems like a people person, and he seems like that that's a office space.
Yeah, that's why I
That's
was
office
laughing because
space
it was like,
reference.
I'm good with people.
What would you say you do here? But it's I think they have all the resources that an F1 team needs. You know, to be good or not, they have everything you need to become an F1 team. So there's no excuses there. But there are foundational issues with personnel that need to be addressed quickly if they want to turn the ship around. I don't think just Lauren Rossi or whatever the guy is that they kind of reposition him somewhere else within the organization as opposed to CEO. Like that's one way to do it. Removing Otmar is one way to do it. But like you literally have two drivers that have decent enough talent. You have a car that's like a tractor trailer, and you have a principal who does not instill faith and confidence within the team and the ability to bring engineers like designers on in a competitive landscape. So there's a lot of things that they need to do. I think personnel is the biggest factor here.
Yeah, 100%. They need to do something. We'll talk about it later, but Alpine may or may not be in my hot seat this week. They have a lot of issues to figure out. But maybe like you said earlier, get Ryan Reynolds in the seat.
Yeah, as Van Wilder,
Yeah.
not Deadpool.
So so
Yeah,
what about Monaco going forward? Like every year we have this conversation, right? It's kind of a boring race this year because of the lap one incident and then being able to slap on hards for the rest of the race. Even the guys like who threw medium on the Maxes and stuff like that who started on hards. I was like, for sure, these like all these guys have to pit, and George and whatnot. They were able to take mediums the whole length of the race, which is insane. So
yeah. Max even came on his team radio and was like, "This is boring as hell." Like
hey, it's like I should have brought my pillow. Like
yeah,
lap 20, he was already bored.
yeah. Lewis
Like,
suggested a forced tire change strategy, like for Monaco. I think that's a great way to go. Listen, if you're not gonna make the car smaller, if you're not going to widen the tracks, which is damn near impossible at this point, what are you going to do to introduce some excitement? Like, I get that Saturday qualifying means a lot more for this race specific to other races on the calendar, but that's cool. Like that's cool. I don't mind giving qualifying a little bit more attention than usual, but there needs to be another thing involved to help like yeah, like what are we watching if we know like that the end of the race is going to be either the exact same as qualifying or somewhere near it, especially the top 5 are going to be locked in. Like I hate thinking that we need to worry about an accident happening in order for a shakeup, because we saw accidents happening in this one and it only really shook up the back half of the grid, which I wasn't really paying attention to anyways.
right.
So this is a situation where I think they need to inject some sort of change that boosts up the entertainment factor. I've listened to pretty much. So we're publishing Monday night, the 27th. A lot of other F1 podcasts have already published their recap of Monaco, and every single one of them have alluded to the fact that it's a boring race. If it wasn't for that first lap incident and the last lap where Charles won and the decorum around it and all the emotions, this would have been an absolutely eraser
Would have been
a yeah, it would have been
unwatchable.
nothing. It would have been like just a waste of fucking time. Like I wouldn't have even watched the recap. I probably would have gotten on this episode with you and just talked about Chris. We wouldn't have anything to talk about. We'd be done with at the 20-minute mark. Like
100%.
so this is one of those things where you can call it the crown jewel all you want. You can say it's a part of like the what the fuck is it called with the Indy
The
500 and
triple
Le Mans, the Triple
triple crown, yeah,
Crown.
the Indy
You
5,
could
yeah, yeah, yeah.
artificially try to like introduce like some sort of like kind of elevate this race to more than what it is, but you're not fooling anyone. For 78 fucking laps, the viewers saw what they saw, and it was a dud of a race except for the bookends. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's so iconic. You get the yachts, you get all the celebrities, and the track is the streets of Monaco, one of the wealthiest nations, and there's no runoff. It's tight street corner. It's like the epitome of street tracks. It's I've raced a lot on the video game with Sam, and it's the hardest track by far. You have to be focused, laser focused. That's why quality is so exciting, just because there's so much um, anxiety as you're like going at full flat out through the track. But yeah, it just kind of ends there because of the size of the cars. I mean, we just talked about the Ollie Behrman, Kimi Antonelli back and forth in F2, and that was more exciting than the entire race of F1. They came out, they were making passes and turns. They
And they're in
did
stock
a
cars, like it's not like
yeah,
yeah.
and they did a switchback and a hairpin. Like they went too wide into the hairpin and going like side by side. Like that's racing, and that's what I think people really want and really miss. So something has to change with Monaco. I mean, I know there's been rumors about the race coming off the calendar because of this. We'll see. It is iconic. It is legacy, and quality is really exciting. I don't know if they want to get rid of the pomp and circumstance of the race, but they have to change something. Start with the size of the car if they can fix that, but if not, do the mandatory pit stops or whatever it
Yeah, I
has
think
to
I
be.
think I think the sad thing is, Chris, is they don't have to do anything. We just talked
Yeah.
about like they don't have to do shit. Like they make so much money, and Liberty Media is like after I think it's like the second biggest sports conglomeration in the world. At like I think several $billions. They don't have to do jack shit until the fans stop watching it. Like if you really want to make a dent, like everyone needs to get together and like just let the rich people that show up live like enjoy it, and the old Uber fans that like want to travel to it, they'll be able to get like a destination like effect out of it. But the people sitting at home, like you just tune off, like there's a reason why Wednesday night, or sorry, Thursday night football this past year, terrible games, terrible games. The scheduling was so awful. Like no one wanted to watch it was, and it was the first year that Amazon had NFL games on, so they were able to broker a deal where Amazon's like, hey, we'll pay you an X $1 million like amount, and then yeah, the first year you guys can give us like the shittier games just to kind of get the ball rolling. But next year we're gonna have to get some premier games, like because Amazon's not about to spend all that money on distribution rights and not have eyeballs come to watch, stay and watch the games on their platform. Like when you look at it that from that point of view, like F1 TV, Sky Sports, ESPN F1, like these guys are all paying top dollar for the ability to distribute this product to viewers in specific regions. And if they see that Monza's up, Canada's up, all like they're up across the board, and Monaco's down like severely, then they're probably going to want to pay attention to it, right? But until something like that happens, they don't have to do anything.
Yeah, I agree, and that's probably going to be the case. I mean, I know the drivers are starting to outspoke about it. There was, did you see that the meme from Max where Sky Sports was like, "I heard you called the race boring," and he's like, "Yeah, how was it for you?" Like, at
Was it
least
exciting? Yeah, was it exciting for you guys? Like, what
yeah.
about it was exciting?
Well, it's one of those things where that when people are on the payroll and you always hear the announcers are like, "Oh, this is the best moment" and stuff like that. They're trying to hype it up, get people excited. They're kind of like, "This is actually really boring."
Or
So
like when you have a group of friends and like there's a really nice group, like a couple that has their first kid. It's an ugly baby, but they're such a nice couple. You don't ever want to say, I mean, you never want to say call anyone's baby ugly, but even you go home to with your wife or your husband, you're like, that's a good kid. Because you like the couple so much, you don't want to say anything bad about their kid. That's how I feel about Monaco.
yeah.
Like you don't like everyone's kind of just pitter patting around the fact that it is like not the best grid. It's probably the worst grid on the fucking like on the worst track on the grid. But no one's gonna like it, no one's gonna be like, hey, let's take this off the calendar because look at all the yachts and the famous like it's a marketing like treasure like box. There's a lot of marketing that happens and a lot of like high powered people that want to keep it on the calendar, so it'll stay on the calendar. I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is like, is it a is it worth getting up at 7 o'clock to watch it? A lot of these races, like I think they're really worth getting up at a certain or staying up at a certain odd hour of the day in the states and watching it. But like every year that goes by, Monaco just becomes one that I'm like, I'll just watch it when I'm up, and then maybe around lunchtime or something, I'll give it a watch.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say on that though is the exciting thing about this race, besides the race itself not being exciting, is that we've had 8 races and 4 different winners, and we all thought Max was going to be, clear domination. And it turns out that there are some weaknesses in the Red Bull. It didn't like this track at all, which probably means it's not going to like Singapore, which
Mm.
potentially might mean it not like Coda. Coda was actually a lot bumpier than we thought, for a purpose-built track. And there's other tracks that might show the weaknesses. And I think we're getting close to the end of the development cycle in this regulation set. So the McLaren is reaching the peak of the Red Bull. Ferrari looks really strong too. I mean, Charles is only 31 points behind Max now, so basically just over a race away. This actually could be a pretty close WDC. I mean, Max is obviously still favorite on a lot of tracks. He'll probably dominate, but now the
Yeah,
McLarens,
there's 24 points separating the constructors' cup with Red Bull and Ferrari, and then McLaren's
yeah.
not too far behind. They're about to bridge that 200 point gap in probably a matter of a race or two.
And
Um,
Lando's at 113 behind Charles at 138 in WDC, and they weren't in that great of a car until 2 races ago. So there could be a 3-way fight for WDC this year, and props off to Vegas, because Vegas gave Lando second place odds for WDC before this even started. So they must have talked to Zach Brown way ahead of the game, and knew their development plan.
or they're probably
You
in
know,
on it. They're probably all in on it, and it's a fixed
Probably.
sport.
It's
It's a
all a
fixed
fucking
sport. I don't
simulation.
think
It's
they're
all a
even
race.
driving. I think like they just program into each car what's going to happen, and the drivers are
Yeah.
like the best actors that ever lived.
I mean, maybe that's why Max is falling asleep. He's like, this is stupid.
Yeah, maybe that's why Alonso's able to call out ridiculous shit like while he's still driving, because he's like probably not actually driving. It's probably all a simulation. We're all living in the
Actually,
matrix.
I think a lot about that. These guys are watching the TVs. They're driving at like 300 kph and changing buttons and talking, and they all sound fine. You may be onto something there.
Yeah,
But
no.
yeah, no, I'm excited about the fact that we're gonna have a rundown. It'd be great to kind of go into the last couple of races. Was still, I was like, do I even go to Coda this year, because the championship will be over by then, but it might not be at this point. So we're in for potentially a good season, and hopefully starting with next race we'll be kind of back to normal. So let's I guess let's go into winners and losers. Do you have any, I see you have a couple, maybe some crazy call outs on the winners circle here.
So hear
So who
me
you got?
out.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with Shell's business development. Shell, the oil company. Because not
Cool.
only are they the premier sponsors for Ferrari, who won the Monaco Grand Prix this week, but they're also the title sponsors for Penske Automotors in the IndyCar circuit, where Joseph Newgarden won his second Indy 500 in a row. So hats off to Shell. They are crushing it right now on the business development side, especially in the automotive, like kind of sporting world. So hats off to Shell for just doing that.
Well, I'm
Uh,
gonna hold on. I'm gonna piggyback onto that and
mhm.
say HP did just as good of a job, because they picked a time to come on board right when the baby blue Ferrari was coming out and give that baby blue wing. But then the very next race, Charles wins the race and has like shots of him swan diving into the lake
With
with
the HP
yachts in
logo
the
on his back.
background, and the HP logo was front and effing center. And I was like, these motherfuckers already got their money's worth. So
Yeah, my buddy actually works at HP, and he's been working there for a while now. And he was pretty much like, "Dude, they spend somewhere near like $100 million for the F1 and PSG, or not PSG. What soccer team were they doing? They're doing like a major league soccer team. Hold on one second, let me find out.
I don't even know what the soccer team, but PFL comes to mind, but
Real
HPS.
Madrid, yeah, sorry, Real Madrid. So they, yeah,
Yeah,
between Real Madrid and F1, they're spending anywhere near $100 million worth of sponsorship dollars. So luckily, very luckily, they caught a really good uh, time to be a Ferrari sponsor.
absolutely. But yeah, hats off to both Shell and HT business development teams. You guys are killing it, picking the right moves at the right times. Uh, you know,
Talk about some
had,
legacy companies.
yeah, man. Still, throwing out big bucks, but making the big bucks. So who else you got in winners?
So I also have, I got Yuki Tsunoda scored some points again this week. So looking really strong, looked really good in qualifying as well. So hats off to Yuki. He's really making a push to become a serious contender in some of these conversations around the paddock. Oscar Piastri, I said it last episode. I'll say it again. I think he's just a couple of steps away from winning his first race in like actual race in Formula One. With that that reset standing, in his way during this week, I think he would have gotten P2 this week. And Charles Leclerc, I'll let you talk a little bit more about Charles, but I do have two kind of out of the box winners, and I'm going to say Esteban Ocon and Kevin Magnussen. And the reason I said that is because without them, all we would have is Charles winning. We would have had nothing else to talk about. So thank you, Esteban Ocon and Kevin Magnussen, for giving us something to watch and talk about, even though they're at the chagrin of your own fates and your own teams. Thank you.
Yeah, without them, we would have had a pretty. Well, I mean, there might have been some pit stops, but I don't think anything would have changed much. It is what it is. Although I think I agree with you on Piastri. I think his race win's coming potentially even this year, and he's the talent. He's world class,
Yeah, that
and
motherfucker can drive.
I think we're going to see a lot of him. Also, he's probably got one of the best personalities on the grid. Guy's level headed, cool. Everyone on the grid seems to like him. He's already adopted by Charles's family, and I think he's going to be a future WDC. So
I
we'll
think so too. I
see.
hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. Um, it's possible without that little bit of floor damage that he might have been able to even pressure Leclerc into making a mistake. I mean, he probably didn't have the horsepower behind him with the downforce laws, even if it's like a small percentage to make that actual pass. But if he could have gotten on the gearbox of Charles every single lap and really pushed him, could have made Charles make a mistake. Ultimately, I love the fact that Charles won, so I don't mind the outcome. But his day is coming. And then Charles Leclerc, like, it's so hard to be not love this guy. I know we've given him shit in a couple episodes about not being aggressive enough and not taking it to the race like Max has to other people. But the guy is super likable. He's got a great story, and now he has a legacy cemented in the future of F1. So super happy for the guy, and I'd like to see him take it to Max for a potential WDC. And I know we talked a lot about science early on, kind of outperforming him. But we'll see. The writing's on the wall that Leclerc might be the more solid pick for the long term driver to sit aside Lewis. But I'm super happy for the guy. And then the other guy I have on my winners is just signs. He got super lucky to get that P3 lock in and to get the podium. He could have easily been at the back of the pack, and we saw how hard it is to pass. So getting that double Ferrari, getting that double HP logo right on the podium in Monaco is a fantastic outcome for the team. And Fred Vasseur I love that guy. I know when he first got the job, I was so skeptical because of his days at Alfa Romeo and them not really doing anything, and they were kind of a shit show. And maybe that's just the Bottas curse following him around, but I love Fred Vasseur. I think he's my favorite TP in the paddock at the moment.
Yeah, I'll double click on that. I think him and still James Vowles are vying for my favorite team principal on the grid. Yeah, Carlos again. Nothing to take away from him. He did what he can't blame him. You know, like he did what he needed to do. He didn't cause any egregious kind of damage by getting damaged himself, right? Like I think Perez spinning into into Hulkenberg was like collateral damage that was initially set off by K Mag, but nothing between the Piastri Carlos incident expanded into affecting other cars. You know, he went straight into the runoff, and he was able to capitalize on a rule that helped him out. You know, so I'm not mad about it. So I think I think I share your sentiment about having Carlos in the winner circle as well. Who you got in your loser circle, Chris?
I mean, yeah, big one is Perez. I mean, not just because of the crash. We talked about it already, but the qualifying, missing, not even making Q2 in the Red Bull, when you've been labeled as king of the streets, you've won this race before, and even if your car isn't loving it, your teammate qualified P6. To be P18 is just sort of inexcusable. So I know there's been a lot of talk about Perez and Sainz and Red Bull, and there's always a lot of criticism and stuff like that. I don't know if Perez is there yet to be able to say, "Hey, let's get him out of the Red Bull seat," but he definitely shows signs of major weaknesses, and he can't perform when the writing is on, or like when push comes to shove. Mexico trying to take that lead and causing the crash with Charles and stuff like this, and just keep menu. Oh wait, there was a crazy statistic I saw is that Alex Albon has out qualified Logan Sargent in 29 out of 29 races in qualifying.
Mm-hmm.
However, Logan Sargent has beaten Sergio Perez in qualifying 4 times. I think that was that stat like blew my mind. That
Yeah,
Logan Sargent never once beat his teammate, but Sergio Perez in a Red Bull has been beaten by Logan Sargent on more than one occasion.
yeah. I think it's starting to expose his weaknesses, and I mean, it's the ability to persist, right? Like not just be good in any every other week, but to be good no matter what. And when you're in a machine that is still, I think Red Bull is still at the top of the pack, definitively as of this moment in time. That could change over the course of the season, very soon, actually, which would be exciting to see. But he is still in a top tier car that is being managed by a group of people that are very exceptional at what they do. So I'm not understanding where this delta between him and Max are, other than talent, right? And if that's the case, then they haven't signed him just yet to an extended contract. They are considering him higher than others. I'm not sure why they're letting this Carlos Sainz conversation go away. Because even though Carlos in the last couple of weeks haven't really showed exactly the same amount of excellence that he did during that race win a couple of weeks back, um, he is still, I think, performing a lot better than Checo, and he's much more consistent. So I get it. I actually didn't put Checo in my loser circle, but I definitely get why you did. I think given the 80% 20% split of blame that we're actually bestowing upon K Mag, it was kind of outside maybe Checo's control in this incident. But you're also right. He also does share in some of that blame in this week's race. So I get it. Yeah, Perez being in the loser circle, I'm with it.
I mean, listen, if I was Helmet or Christian, I would want Carlos, not just because um, Checo is outperform or underperforming, but in a world where Max doesn't have the super dominant car, like listen, I still think Max is probably the best driver on the grid by far at the moment. He's world class, and I think he's going to continue to be WDC for a long time, or has the potential to be. But let's say that the gap closes between McLaren and Ferrari, and Max wins some races but doesn't win others. If you don't have your teammate finishing on the podium with you, or behind you, or fighting with you, or being able to use team strategy to dominate, to dictate what other cars can and can't do with strategy, and you have someone finishing P18 or qualifying P18, then you're going to lose constructors championship, and that's where the money is. So you need someone who can consistently be up there with you and fighting with you, even if that means that teammates are butting a little bit for wins or fighting each other. You need two drivers who can consistently finish at the top if you want to win these trophies. And if Max doesn't, win 22 out of 24 races, if it's like 8 to 10 races, then you better have those points from your teammate. And if Checo's not getting them, then I'd rather have someone like Sainz getting them. We'll see what happens the rest of the season. But yeah, it would be a shame for someone like Sainz to be into Williams if Checo's just underperforming. So um, moving on though, I also have Alonso on my losers just because like he got out qualified by Stroll. He was such a dominant performance last year, and this year's kind of fell off. And I think that partly has to do with the fact that he signed a contract solidifying his future, not only at the team, but as his team, in the team, as a businessman, as an executive, as a decision maker. And I think we're starting to sort of see the crack shine through that Alonso's career is going to come to an end. He wants to move on to the next phase. He's had a lot of conversations about that publicly about, we'll see what happens, see if I still want to race. And, kind of once you've made that decision mentally, you kind of lose that hunger and fire. He's obviously still a great driver, and I still love the guy. But I just think, he's kind of had a bad start to the year, and, it wasn't that great of a weekend for him. So, we'll see what happens the rest of the season. But I think Alonso is probably looking at the last year, maybe one more. We'll see.
Yeah,
Any thoughts?
he's in my loser circle as well. Just a string of not so strong performances, especially against Lance Stroll, who's not the benchmark of excellence that people like to think he is. I can't
Yeah.
even say that with a straight face. But yeah, maybe he is just switching into new gear, which is more of the managerial shift, right? Maybe he is really coming to terms with the fact that Aston Martin is just not going to let go of Lance Stroll, and the best that Alonso could probably do is parlay this into a managerial role because it seems like Papa Stroll really likes him, and he's able to stick around a really minted brand like Aston Martin and maybe help them kind of grow into a world competing team from a different point of view. So he's still, essentially competing, right? So I think yeah, Alonso's on my losers list. I hope he doesn't stay on it for too much longer, but the last couple of weeks have been really disappointing to just kind of see him kind of not optimize on his performances like he used to.
Agreed. And then lastly, I'm going to put Haas on there only because we've already talked about K Mag and Hulkenberg, but they're on my losers list specifically because they're going to lose a lot of money because they have to repair both of those cars, and that's just super unfortunate. I know, like,
And that qualifying, they didn't even they got penalized after qualifying, right, for like having like a improper wingtip or
oh
something
yeah,
like
they
that.
they
Yeah,
both got disqualified for
yeah,
qualifying for having an illegal wing. I think
yeah.
the DRS was opening too wide, which is that's kind of unfortunate. Obviously, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was one of those things, and they got disqualified. But another reason to not be involved in shunts, like you're so far back in the pack in Monaco, points are very, very likely not going to happen. So, like you said, Hulkenberg said it perfectly, unnecessary. So, but yeah, they're going to have a lot to work on and a lot to fix and a lot to do after this race. So, we'll see what Haas has, and we'll see if they and the next year Drive to Survive if they make fun of the whole gotta phone Gene. We'll see. So
I
we'll
mean,
see what happens.
this is another situation where I have Hulkenberg on my loser seat, and felt bad for him. There's nothing he could have done. He went around the left hand outside of Perez to try to avoid it, and if he probably had maybe half a second more, he would have been able to. But it just goes to show how quickly these cars move and how quickly things can change for the worse or for the better for some people. And this was a week where Kevin was a bystander of some of his teammates' foibles, and that sucks because he kept a cool head. He was like, "Hey, that was unnecessary," like that, and you could feel it when he said "damn it." You can feel it, right? It's
Yeah.
the only thing that I felt more is George saying "poodling." I don't know what the fuck that was, but I was just like, dude, just do you understand how stupid you sound sometimes saying dumb shit like that? Like I get it, it's British, but man, does it sound dumb. So yeah, Hulkenberg's on my loser seat, and I'm gonna round this out with Joe Guan Yu. Chris, I think you said best when we were discussing this pre recording, but you almost forget he's even there. Uh, there's just no emphasis on his drive. He's not showing up like on the broadcast. There's just not a whole lot of narrative to kind of to hold on to with him. He the Chinese driver. He could have had so many different ways to market him, but I just don't think. You know what, Chris? Now that I'm thinking about it, I just don't think F1 is ready to get behind an Asian driver. Period. Alex
Yeah,
Albon might be the closest, like the Thai Brit, like this like hybrid is, but like a pure Asian driver, like a Yuki Tsunoda or a Zhou Guan Yu, like for some reason or another, they're not willing to get behind it, like as a big organization. Like it's usually like the market that they're coming from is kind of pushing for them, right? And those guys are just kind of falling to the wayside. So maybe that has something to contributes to the fact that Joe is a little bit forgettable, but it also is because his performance isn't that great. He's just been just back of the pack this whole year. If it wasn't for Logan Sargent, he might be the worst driver on the grid right now. So that I'm going to put him on my loser seat. I know it's a little bit harsh, but it's just he seems like a nice kid. It just seems like
yeah, I mean,
he's just not
he's definitely
off the
great.
shit.
Great kid and everything like that. But you said his performance is lacking. I mean, these guys, I think they have really big followings in their local demographics. Like Checo is huge in Mexico.
Yeah,
I think Joe is huge in China, and same thing with Yuki in Japan. Like these guys, get huge cheers, even though they're racing for like P16, P17 in their home races and stuff like that. But like you said, the global marketability just kind of isn't there. So we'll see what that leads to in the future. But Joe is just another one of those drivers that, like you said, nothing's really going on. He's not really getting a lot of TV time. He's not making any performances. He's not even having any small standout moments. So if he's not there on the grid next year, I would not be surprised. And if he is, it's because of whatever that local marketability is that we're not kind of privy to, and how much like sponsor dollars or whatever he's bringing in. But I think it's rough for Joe. And then hot seat, I don't want to go too into it anymore. I got Alpine on there. They just have a lot of problems to fix. They have the drivers to fix, the car to fix, the organization to fix. So we're gonna put them on the hot seat just because, you know, Drive to Survive can only have so many episodes about Alpine crashing into each other and causing a huge ruckus. So we had two in one season last year.
yeah, and the year before that.
Yep.
I mean, I'm going to round it out the hot seat with Esteban Ocon and Kevin Magnussen. They were on my winner circle for giving us the most exciting portions of the race outside of Charles' eventual win. But then they also, the nature of those exciting moments were the reason why they're in my hot seat. I don't know where Esteban's going to go after this year. He's not locked in, neither is K Mag. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a bit of a shift or if they both fall off. I'd be a little bit more surprised if Ocon fell off than Kevin Magnussen did, since he is a race winner. I'm sure another team would be willing to entertain his services, maybe even for just a year until maybe like a stopgap until someone else comes into seat. But or I said earlier this year, maybe a couple episodes ago, that I think that both Esteban and Pierre stay at Alpine. That could, I still, despite what happened here this week, I still think that could unfortunately happen, where they just keep everything the same throughout these regulations, and then they figure it out in 2016, which I think they'd be losing a full year if they did that. But I don't think Alpine cares at this point. I think they're just trying to keep their head above the water. So, and K Mag, his career isn't solidified yet. I think just the string of destructive, driving would
Yeah.
probably have Haas take a second look at his cost profit benefits, right? Like I think they're definitely more on the cost side than they are the profit side. So maybe bringing in another venerable driver to help Ollie Behrman, onboard properly. That could happen, right? Or someone like a Yuki could go to Haas and kind of maybe make that team his own and be the D1 driver there. I think that could also potentially happen. So and then there's Io Komatsu there, right? So having like a Japanese team principal and then having a Japanese driver, that could be a really cool story, right? And they have that, they need the funding, so maybe they can pull from a Japanese financier as opposed to a warlord. Yeah, but that's my hot teas, Chris. Esteban
Yeah.
Ocon, Kevin Magnussen. We got Canada in 2 weeks. What are you thinking is going to happen there?
I mean, yeah, Canada's a fan favorite. Everyone loves that race. Back to a more traditional street track. Traditional purpose-built track, and I'm excited for it. Like, I love the Canadian GP. I really want to go there. I almost went there 2 years ago, but then it was raining too much, and we decided not to make the trip. So, hopefully, I could get out there this or next year. But I'm excited for it. I think it'll be good, and I think it'll be really good to see on another traditional racetrack where these teams lie. Is McLaren going to be able to fight for that win? Is Ferrari going to also be able to fight for the win? And, or is Max going to win by another 25 seconds? We'll see what happens, but I'm definitely excited for it. And I'm fine with the week off after the snooze fest that was Monaco. Hopefully, the FIA or F1 finds some ability to make some changes for next year, but we'll see. Just don't make it a sprint weekend.
Yeah, I mean, they probably will. But
Why?
yeah, race is going to be on the 9th. We will probably record on the 10th. But until then, peace out, everybody.
Charles Leclerc. See ya. Thank you for listening. Shyam and I would love for you to join the Fan Team Radio community. So please like, subscribe, or follow on your platform of choice, and we'll see you next time.